And so she said to her school kid's principal, literally, I want you to come and flip the mattress over and get him to school. And that's what he was doing. He's got to leave his home a half hour earlier to go to this kid's house because his job was to make sure that kid got to school. His job is to make sure every kid learns, right? And in that particular kid's case, it was about getting him out of bed and getting him to school because he is much more likely to have good outcomes in life, statistically better health and like longer life if he goes to school every day.
Welcome to the Education Matters podcast. I'm your host, Jason Buccheri. Today, I'm interviewing Doug Roberts. Doug has spent the better part of 2 decades at the intersection of public education and innovation. As the founder of the Institute for Education Innovation, Doug recognized something that most people miss. Real breakthroughs in education don't come from policy announcements or pitch decks. They come from connections and conversations. His life's work has been about getting superintendents and Edtech entrepreneurs to talk to each other, not past each other, in the hopes of building more equitable, responsive, and human-centered schools. But long before he built IEI, Doug was just a kid riding his bike through the fishing village of Northport, New York. That small-town upbringing full of music, theater, baseball, and community still grounds him. It's why you hear such deep reverence in his voice when he talks about educators. Their capacity for care, the grief they carry, and the love that drives them to show up again and again. Doug is the kind of person who sees the full human story behind the data, behind the titles, and behind the noise. In this conversation, we talk about what it really means to lead in education. We explore the growing mismatch between what society expects of schools and what we're willing to invest in them. Doug shares some of the most powerful stories he's witnessed, from principals going to wake up students in the morning to get them to school, to superintendents who carry the weight of funeral after funeral in their communities. We also talk about why boards matter, why startups need to build with, not for educators, and what it means to preserve the soul of education while embracing innovation. So this episode was recorded several months before all the major changes to the U.S. Department of Education. So Doug and I went back and added a postscript with his advice for leaders in such times of tumult. If you've ever wondered what it looks like to build bridges across the educational divide between the public and private sectors, between innovation and tradition, between leadership and learning, this episode is for you. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Doug Roberts. Doug Roberts, welcome to the Education Matters podcast. Where does this podcast find you today?
Hey, Jason, how are you? I'm here in the office in Northport, Long Island, New York.
Excellent, Doug. So I would have given you a proper introduction at this point, but can you give us a bit of an overview of the work you're currently involved in?
Yeah, I'm the founder, CEO of the Institute for Education Innovation. We're a U.S. think tank of school superintendents. We try to put district leaders and superintendents at the center of the conversation around innovation in public schools. And we gather superintendents several times a year to think through all the big challenges we're facing, engage with our partners on the corporate side, and try to come up with solutions together as a team, working together on behalf of students.
And I'm certainly going to dive into this because I'm very interested in particular with people with your kind of purview, because oftentimes education can be very, and necessarily so, very focused on whether it be state or provincial or even local concerns. But you have this great, at least nationwide view of the system. And so I definitely want to dive into that. But the way I start every podcast is to get to know the guest a little bit more. So can you tell me a little bit about where and when you grew up?
Yeah, I actually live here in my hometown. I grew up in Northport, New York, about an hour outside of New York City. My daughter attends the schools I went to as a kid. I left for a long time, went off to college and see the world. And, I think it was Kurt Vonnegut who said everyone should spend their 20s in San Francisco. Well, I did that. Met a pretty cool lady in grad school. We're now married, raising our daughter together. And it was her idea to come back to my hometown and get to spend time here with family and my dad before we lost him, and my mom who's still here. Yeah, born and raised, but have lived several different places and gotten, as I built my kind of career from teaching on, have had the opportunity to travel to almost every place in the country to go visit a school district or two or three. And, happy to live here in a little coastal town, a little fishing town outside of New York City, and where we can access everything that New York has, and get anywhere in the world on an airplane, but also live the little fishing village life. So it's cool. We have the best of both worlds here.
Well, that's awesome, and you're always in good standing on this podcast when you start by citing Kurt Vonnegut. Sounds like a fascinating place to grow up.
Yeah. No, it's okay. Northport. It's a village of about 6,000 people. Its roots are in clamming, lobstering, shipbuilding, and we got the larger area is about 20,000 people. That covers the school district. It's a East Northport school district here, so it's a larger community that serves the schools. Looking out my window right now, we have an office downtown here. I look out at Northport Harbor, and we spend a lot of time on the water here. We spend a lot of time at beaches. We still have a commercial fishing dock that I can see out here from my window, although that the baymen are few and far between these days, but they are still out there working. We don't really, all the lobsters come from Canada now. There are so few lobsters here now, but clams and oysters and mussels are all alive and well for them. It's a community that has diversity of political thought, which I actually appreciate. That there are people who can, I think we're a community where people can kind of disagree and get along, and I do appreciate that. It's an upper middle class community. I wish we had more diversity of background, of race, and all that. But we've always it's always been a place that has welcomed all. I think our school district does a really good job of including students of color, students who are learning English, ENL students, and I think that's an important. Those values were given to me by this community, and I've carried them through life, and I carried them certainly into the work of our business.
And I do want to ask you about your education there, but can you tell me how you and your friends played when you were young?
Well, if it was up to me, we would have always been playing baseball, or football. I was one of those kids who loved sports, still do, but was kind of bad at them. But I worked hard, so coaches would give me spots on teams when I was younger.
Coaches love hard workers, yeah.
Right, but when I got to high school, there's this guy. He did me a great favor, and he was like, "Hey, listen, this is not going to be your path to success in life. You should probably spend more time, in doing theater and music," which is the other big thing I did as a kid. So, that's all I ever wanted to do. But when we were real little, it was all kinds of we would go out in the woods and do various hide and seek, manhunt type, capture the flag type things. When you grow up around a lot of woods and a lot of open spaces, you have the privilege of doing that kind of stuff and running around freely and riding. We just rode our bikes everywhere in this town. I couldn't wait to get away from I love my mom and dad, but couldn't wait to have that independence and go to, whether it was to the candy store or the basketball court or the beach or whatever. We were just on bikes nonstop.
Is there anything about your upbringing that you wish kids today can experience, maybe your own kids?
Well, I have two ways of answering that. The first one is the sort of big picture, having my IEI hat on, when I think about public schools and school districts and the superintendents and, the ones I know who've come from, very difficult upbringings, but also those who are serving in communities where a lot of kids are, don't have the kind of like idyllic, community and family that I had. I enjoyed great privilege growing up in this place, and I wish every kid, not that it has to look like my community, but I wish every kid had the opportunity could have the opportunity to walk around wherever they live, whatever community they live in, safely, and have the opportunity to explore spaces, open spaces. And if you live in a city, you have an opportunity to get to open spaces and explore them, because I think that helps a kid's mind just kind of wander creatively. But there's also the smaller towns tend to take care of their own in a way that, it's like it comes down to things like policing, right? Like our little police force here, I had only 2 run-ins with them as a young man or kid. I was a pretty good kid. But yeah, we were on the beach one time late at night partying, and like at the time I was of course scared and realized we were, being told we had to stop doing what we were doing. And so we quickly did that. But like, when I know now about how some kids interact with law enforcement and adults in their community, and they don't get the second, third chance that, and I had friends who I grew up with who had many more run-ins with law enforcement than I did for various dumb stuff, but still like,
They realized it was dumb kids being dumb kids and gave them the benefit of the doubt.
Right. And we got that because it's a majority white community with, a local police force where like the
community policing.
Right. And many, many kids do not grow up with that. And they grow up in an environment where, because of how they look, they are judged differently than I was as a little white kid in this majority white community. Like that to me is something that I don't know. The best way to fix that is through public education and for our public schools to help students understand where they fit in this society and help the people who are eventually going to be the law enforcement officers or the elected leaders understand that this is something that every kid deserves. And I guess I've sort of tried to build my life and career around paying forward all the great privilege that I got to enjoy. Then the second way I'm going to answer this is like in my own experience as a dad. Like I wish my kid and the kids that she hangs with would spend less time on these screens and more time out like messing around, like spend less time with us. I mean, I love spending time with her, but spend less time with us and more time just exploring a random piece of woods in this great place where we're raising you. It's almost like kids say you have to like, when I grew up, there weren't play dates, right? You just did stuff. Now it's like they're waiting for us to set up the play dates. I don't want to be as involved in my kids' opportunities to play, but we do our best to foster creativity and taking initiative over your own kind of experience and fun and joy. But like, there's also just a way in which, we don't do that as much as a society. There's also more fear about, like the bad people, trying to mess with kids. We know more stories about kids who are harmed and abducted and trafficked. And I think a lot about like, is that just because we know more about it because there's an internet and social media, or does it happen more now? Should I be more afraid, or should I be trying to apply my 80s free range, parenting values to my child? And but the bottom line is I'm very lucky to be able to live in a place where kids can just sort of roam freely and feel safe and feel looked after by a whole community. And I wish every kid could have that opportunity.
Well, I certainly second that. So tell me a little bit about your education. What were your fondest memories of your, let's call it like elementary school education?
Elementary school, playground, science projects, and musical opportunities. As a very young kid, I had, incredible opportunity. This community is very big on art and music, and I was able to, uh, I was able to sing in a little chorus of kids in an opera, right? Like kind of things that like just don't happen to most kids. It was
Mm-hmm.
oh gosh, La Boheme. There's a scene with kids who sing, and we got to be those kids. Like that was cool.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, we had the like best, still do, when my kid just left that elementary, but we had the best playground on the face of the earth. I'm fairly concerned. Huge, lots of woods to play in, and we would just get up to all kinds of fun there. And then I had a couple of teachers who taught me um, a love of science that it's not like I took any science class. I took the bare minimum science classes in college, but like just the way they taught science to us was so experiential and hands-on. Like I always think about that when I think about myself, as a former educator and now as an educator of adults, how rich those hands-on experiences were. So those are the three things I think of.
And as you move through high school and college, what were the things you studied that have most impacted how you think and work today?
These are fun questions. Normally it's like, let's talk about public school.
I appreciate that. We'll get to the public school part, but
Yeah.
I think it's important for folks to know the background of people that are really trying to make a difference in education. So I appreciate that comment.
Yeah. So like in college, what were the sort of most profound learning experiences?
Yeah. What impacted you the most in like, how you see the world and how you think and navigate the world?
Sure. So first I had tremendous undergraduate education at Princeton University. When I got in, I was like, oh my gosh, I hit the jackpot. I can't believe they actually let me in. And I still feel that way. And I have that kind of like joy and mysticism about it, despite its flaws. So at Princeton, I learned to write. I struggled with writing some in high school, or I would like kill people with vocabulary and quantity, but I didn't really understand how to make an argument. Princeton really beat into me, and and I say, like, I got some bad grades there that taught me that I was not doing a good job at this. So then as a history major, I learned how to write cogent arguments and defend them. And I'll forever be grateful for that, because I did really get a lot better and started to get much better grades as my career went on there. Princeton also taught me, especially the history department, taught me to always try to understand the present by looking at the past. And for everything that's going on today, there's usually a pattern that you can look at historically. And it changed my entire studying history at Princeton. The version of it you get as a high school student is somewhat watered down, somewhat driven by the secondary texts that you read. So in college, we got to really look at primary text, and that's where you come to understand, for me, like the big profound thing was like the role of religion in all the various, societies whose histories we studied, and how religion seemed to play a pretty similar role, and it wasn't always a good one. And so understanding the good, the bad, and the ugly, and understanding there are many sides to every situation, understanding that the barbarians didn't really see themselves as barbarians. The Visigoths thought that they were doing the right thing, right? Like that flip for me was a very important understanding that, like you learn about the U.S. Civil War, you just always assume that like it's good guys and bad guys, but like understanding why the Confederates thought that what they were doing was the noble and right thing to do was a really profound piece of learning for me that happened in college. And then in graduate school, I told you earlier, I met my wife there, but this was an intensive 12-month Master's of Education at the Harvard University Grad School of Education, where everything I thought I understood about not only schooling, but justice was flipped on its head. And I think that really helped me develop my philosophy. So like, I think a lot of the writing and other kind of business skills I learned as an undergraduate, but my educational philosophy, my pedagogy, my understanding of power structures as viewed through public schools and public school decision making, were developed in my year at Harvard, not just from these amazing professors like Vito Perrone and Eileen De Los Reyes and Chuck Woolley, but through the colleagues who still remain dear friends, and friends who continue to challenge each other on various things we're working on. About half of us are still public school teachers, including my wife, but half of us are doing other things. We're almost all still, leading or working in the public school system. So, and I include myself in that. So that graduate school work, graduate school was really more about me and my development of my philosophy, whereas undergraduate was more about like learning about the world.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, because I think really in this day and age when things are becoming increasingly complex, having a nuanced and deeper understanding of, opposition and opposite points of view is extraordinarily important now. And I'm sure you bring that in your work as well. So maybe we can start a pivot to the work at IEI, but
sure.
Let me bring us down that path by asking you to describe some of the most inspiring things you've seen over the years in K-12 education.
Yeah. So, so many. I'm just thinking through all the different.
Feel free to list a whole bunch of them.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to start with when I first learned what it takes to be. When I first learned that you have to adapt what it means to be an educator to the students that you're serving, and that it requires an almost kind of selfless, it's entrepreneurial is not the right word, but the kind of the way that entrepreneurs are like ready for whatever, and we're gonna do what we gotta do to get the job done. Like educators, a lot of them have that as well, and the really good ones definitely do. And I think that's why there's so many educators who become entrepreneurs and vice versa. My principal, where I did my student teaching in Boston, I'll never forget this story. And this is one of many people who does work like this, but it was just the first time I encountered it. This was like my moment of like, oh, this is what it is to be a principal of this school in Boston. So place was called, oh gosh, I can't remember the name of the school. It was in Roxbury, Downtown Prep, I think was the name of the school. And, we were student teachers there, via our program at Harvard. And I'll never forget, his name is David Perigo. He explained he was, they were just going through the meeting about like, it was like a staff meeting, here are kids we need to support right now. Here are things that are going on. Here's what we're doing in ninth grade English. Like, and I was student teaching in the humanities, social studies, English classroom. And somebody brought up the name of, how is so-and-so doing? And David told us, well, this is a kid they're talking about. Well, he's been coming to school because his mother asked me to come and make sure he goes to school every day. And I just said, oh, okay. What does that mean? And he told me, well, the mother told me that I was free to go to his room, knock on the door, because she and the kid had like gotten sideways and she couldn't reach him anymore. And so she said to her kid's principal, literally, I want you to come and flip the mattress over and get him to school. And that's what he was doing the first couple times. And then he would just show up and the kid would just be right. Like, talk about that kind of, tough love, and not to mention the time out of his life. He's got to leave his home a half hour earlier to go to this kid's house because his job was to make sure that kid got to school. His job is to make sure every kid learns, right? And in that particular kid's case, it was about getting him out of bed and getting him to school because he is much more likely to have good outcomes in life, statistically better health and like longer life if he goes to school every day. So that's when I realized, wow, this is not, this is not so much about like, let's go read about the Magna Carta and write an essay. This is like, these folks are in it to win it for these students, and they're going to do whatever it takes. And that's what it takes to be an educator. And you see that scale up in all kinds of ways with the superintendents I work with. So that's one. Second one was just when one of the, anytime I watch one of our members, when I say members, I mean the superintendents and IEI, when I watch one of them process a tragedy and just how personal it is. I just had one superintendent tell me once, like, I have to move districts because I've been in this district 6-7 years, and my wife and I, we can't go to any more funerals. Like, we just can't. We can't go to any more funerals. And like, there's nothing to say there. There's nothing to say, like, come on, suck it up. You can go to a few more. Like, the kids need you. It's like, you just get to a point where you can't go to more. And sometimes it was not the kids. Sometimes it's like the kid's parent overdosed, the kid's parent got shot. But like, in a large district, like they have to spend so much time as kind of mourner in chief, grief counselor. Because when you're the leader, like it's on you. And that just how like much that weighs on them is just, I'm just amazed at how they are able to carry on with the work every day. Cause a lot of it's much more mundane stuff, but how personally they all take their work has always been, profound for me. And then I think that one of the other sort of kind of coolest, let's end with a happy one. I want to shout out our executive committee member and current superintendent in Anne Arundel County Public Schools in Maryland, Dr. Mark Bedell. Watching him, he was in Kansas City before. Watching him, and the Kansas City Public Schools was, what's the word? They were they didn't lose their license. They were their accreditation was removed by the state of, by the University of Missouri. So a diploma from a Kansas City Public Schools school was not enough to get you into a University of Missouri university. And the reasons for that and how that came to be, first of all, are full of so many problems, test scores, and how test scores, do they really matter, and how they like are how tests are either aligned or not aligned with what a school actually does, and whether they have bias in them. Tons of questions, right? But for you to use that thing to be punitive and punish tens of thousands of students because maybe some adults made some mistakes and maybe people didn't do well on a test, like it's a strange way of trying to get a district to do what it needs to do. It's not like they were like, here's a bunch of money to try to fix all the things you're not doing well. It was like, oh, we're going to like kick you while you're down. And so Mark he didn't have to, but he went there and he told the board, I'm going to get that accreditation back. Watch me go. And they just let him do his thing. And he jumped through all the hoops. He did all the things, whether these were things that were just to ask a, underfunded urban school system to do. He was like, doesn't matter. We got to do it. We got to get this district accredited again. And he accomplished it before he left. It's one of the kind of single most impressive and powerful accomplishments I've seen an educational leader do. And then I was just, I was glad to see that like the city and specifically the Kansas City Chiefs recognized the accomplishment. Now, we're just talking about getting accreditation, right? Like that's not like you're the best school district in the country. That just means you're meeting the bare minimum by that state. But like everybody rallied around because I think people realized how unfair it was to the kids in the schools. So like the Kansas City Chiefs honored them at the 50-yard line during a game for this work. And people in that stadium probably had no idea what the hell accreditation means or anything, but like to see somebody set out to do something that seemed very much an uphill battle and do it, it just is, it inspires all of us to think like, all right, so whatever challenges we're facing in our districts, we can overcome them. Then the last thing I'd like to say about like, this is maybe a little less happy, but the phenomenon that we're seeing now, which might transition to some of the other stuff we want to talk about, we're now seeing many people achieve results like Dr. Bedell did in Kansas City, like, here's the goal. The goal is we want to improve graduation rates. We want to improve our rating on the state rating systems, blah, blah, blah. We're seeing them accomplish those goals, yet somehow boards are still running them out of town, or boards are saying like, yeah, we don't want to work with you anymore. And it comes down to like either a cult of personality or personality differences or whatever. But like, I'm just amazed that that adults can't get out of the way of their own kind of like styles and egos to look at the data and say, you know what, our schools are doing well. We should probably keep this going. And I don't know how we end this, without just like trying to take all the, boards of ed to school and like, look, focus on your data, not on something you might not like about what someone said or didn't say.
Well, this is a broader conversation that, maybe Doug, we get a panel of folks together to talk about, because, for example, from my purview, and a lot of the listeners here will be Canadian as well, most of what you're talking about is familiar yet totally alien. Dealing with complicated boards is the familiar part, but losing accreditations and like this stuff just doesn't happen in Canada. And it's probably structurally for a lot of structural reasons in terms of how the systems are built. But I do find the idea of boards overstepping to be very problematic. And it's not even overstepping into through that cult of personality that you're talking about. Like, that's part of human nature, and that's always something we're going to have to wrestle with. But I think you would have less of that if you had boards that were established that could actually bring deeper and more insight into, the system that they're helping govern, right? Like in any business, right? And this as an entrepreneur, like, you bring people onto your board that have areas of expertise, right? And that are going to help your business and your community grow. Now, with public oversight, which obviously both of you and I think is very important, it is part of electing folks. But there's got to be a way to, like you hinted at, to educate these boards, to help them understand the history, as you were saying earlier, of education and different ideas around education, and also to get them on board with what the leaders are trying to do. So I find this, and in particular, with my own background, to be very interesting. But let me take this in a bit of a different direction for now, because I would like to come back to this, and maybe it's a whole nother podcast we do. But you work with so many great leaders, and you just identified some examples of what they're doing. Can you describe the qualities that you most admire in district leaders?
Yes, I really can. I think about it a lot. I find most of the people I meet in the superintendent or top leadership roles in districts to be exemplars of leadership, of driving for results, holding people accountable, but doing so with unconditional love. Like the ability for them to, like, love all the students, regardless of what rules they may or may not have broken, what their grades are, how engaged they are or not. How I get to walk around with one of our superintendents, Dr. Llewellyn Brown in Ithaca. I walked around the buildings with him. He'd give me a tour of the district on our road show this past fall. And he had a couple of kids come up and like give him, some critical comments, right? Like, and he welcomed it, and he like responded with care and love. And he was like, oh yeah, that guy comes to our board meeting every month to criticize me. And that guy's dad comes to the board meeting every month to criticize me. And, we joke around, I know how he feels about me, but he knows that I care about him learning. Like that ability to put self aside and focus on, like, students are the purest, they're pure as the driven snow, and they deserve all of our support and attention and effort to make sure they can learn. And the fact that they can all bring that while also, many of them being under kind of political attack for in some cases just for daring to say that every kid deserves an equal opportunity, like for mentioning the word equity and inclusion, while practicing that, like that they can kind of do both those things at the same time. I will always find impressive. I also find their effort. They live, breathe, sleep, eat this at night, overnight. They're also incredibly driven. A lot of them are driven to work on themselves while they work on improving things in the district. Very few groups of people will, focus on relationship building and networking, at an IEI hospitality. Maybe after dinner, we have like a hospitality where people keep conversations going, and they'll be up there late, 10, 11, and still be at the gym at 4:30 a.m. getting their daily workout. Like, I've never seen a group of people who work out more religiously than superintendents. And most of them tell me, like, I need it for my sanity.
Yeah.
Like, if I don't get that in, I'm not going to be able to function. I find it endlessly impressive that they're able to focus on wellness.
Yeah. So there's a few things I'd love to highlight there, because it completely resonates with my experience all these years working with superintendents, is that I think the general public's view, and let me speak for myself. My view of what the superintendents did was certainly skewed by The Simpsons and Superintendent Chalmers. Like, I think those of us that grew up with that had this idea that, just these really like stuffy bureaucrats that really didn't know what was going on, out of touch with what was happening on the ground. But the example you brought up of Dr. Lavelle Brown, I have actually met him several times. And I would love to replace everyone's vision of Chalmers with Dr. Brown, because I think he's one of the people that embody that role and how difficult it is and how much work they put in. So I definitely just want to emphasize that point.
But also investing in the relationships,
Mm-hmm.
I want to call out my friend, Dr. Christy Brooks from Chattahoochee County, Georgia, right? Very different place from Ithaca, New York, that we were just talking about, or Kansas City, rural mountains, Georgia. Like, when you walk around the school with her, and I get to visit them, we do these road shows in the fall, just the sense of community in that district and the sense of pride in the things that they're good at. And her district happened to be, their riflery team is like they win the state riflery championship every year. You can tell when you walk around with somebody how much you can tell the culture that they've built in how kind of kids interact with each other, interact with the superintendent, and vice versa. And like that, that takes it takes a lot of time and energy to build. And I just know that, the people in our group tend to self-select for the ones who really focus on building those relationships with kids and with teachers, so that you don't want people to be afraid of you when you walk in. You want them to welcome you the way they did with all the IEI superintendents I've had the opportunity to visit. And that's hard to do. And we try to kind of unpack that and help leaders understand how you can do this. And we share the stories and share the anecdotes of what works and what doesn't work. But there's an element of staying focused on kids and student learning that everybody wants kids to learn. And so if you can stay focused on that, then the other kind of areas of conflict can be resolved as long as we stay focused on that.
So maybe this question will allow you to expand on that or give some other examples, but there is a huge disconnect between what's happening on the ground in education at all the levels, what the media perception of education is.
Yeah.
And so the general public, I don't think, has as true a sense of what's happening as they should.
Okay.
What would you say are the most important things for the general public to understand about the education system?
That we ask more of it every year. and we take it for granted. We just take for granted, like, oh, you know, my kid is struggling with this or that, learning disability, or they need this or that accommodation, or they need to talk to a counselor to get help with kind of social emotional, like, people just sort of lay these demands on the public schools, and rightfully so. But they don't necessarily understand that these are all things that districts have had to grow and be able to do in recent years without an increase in funding. Yes, we had a big surge in the U.S. with our COVID relief program, the ESSER dollars, which just sunsetted this past fall. Like, yes, so all of a sudden, like, districts who couldn't afford it now could have mental health resources available. And then you also saw a push for health providers to be more accessible to public school students, and fast track students who need to get mental health services. Like, these are all good things, but I want the public to understand that we are asking more of our schools, and we're not necessarily funding all the stuff we're asking them to do. And because schools are generally run by people who want to figure it out and help, they're trying to figure out how to do it. And, we should, I wish the public would give their public schools the benefit of the doubt sometimes. And that goes for the leaders. Like, I wish the public would understand that, like, for you to get to be in a leadership position in a school district means you've had to do a bunch of work to understand kids and take classes and understand student psychology and leadership, and but you also have to have proven yourself to many people that you are students first in your orientation, and that you're also a good leader with a head on your shoulders who can understand the various technical intricacies of the job that you have. In other words, like, for you to get to be a superintendent, you're there because you care. Like, it's almost like I want the public to understand that these are people who have skill sets that could be applied in the private sector where they could make a lot more money. Mm-hmm. And right now, the way we're treating our public educators, I got a lot of superintendents who are telling me, like, I'm out. Like, I can go make more money with less headaches, and I could be home every night at 6:00 and not have to go to board meetings or to PTA meetings, or when these guys work every night. And, like, yes, they do get paid more than everyone else in their school system, but you can make that kind of money or better. Right. And then your nighttime activities might be like going out for a steak dinner with some clients or something, instead of going from the middle school play to the basketball game. Right. Like, and having people yell at you while you're there. Like, it's not an easy, it's a hard job. And, I don't think we need to go pay. I'm not telling people we got to pay superintendents more, although if we did, we'd retain more of them. But I wish the public would understand how hard the job is and give them the benefit of the doubt, and let them have a chance. If they make a mistake, give them a chance to sort of make it right.
Yeah. Well, if I can share with you a view from above, so to speak, here in Canada, in the US, in your education system, you have a much bigger brain drain than we do in our public education system. Some of the best educators, and I bet you're an example of this too, best educators that I know are on the fringes of education. They've left the classroom because there was such an amazing teacher making $50,000, $60,000 a year that a Edtech company or a publisher realize how amazing this person is and pay them double that money. How do they not leave the classroom? So I agree with you. I think the ones that are there, certainly we owe them more respect and understanding of their role. Okay, so my next question, and I think it ties to your answer there, is a two-part question.
Yeah.
What would you say is the biggest challenge in public education? And how do you think we begin to address it?
I mean, geez. It's the biggest challenge is inequity. It's and that can be that inequity can be sliced many, many different ways. We got some states in the U.S. where you have districts that are run by the district organized by county instead of by zip code. And so you've got like, a large school system that is much leaner on administrative costs because you've got one superintendent over like tens of thousands of students. But maybe there's less kind of local control and less of a kind of intimate feeling in each of those little neighborhood schools because they have to feed into the larger system, right? And then you've got other states where, like mine in New York, we have 600 districts and the average size is, like around 1,000 kids. And that means you've got many, many more people. You're paying a lot more money as a state for all these administrators. And you've got many small districts, but you get a lot more local control over how you want to run your own district. Like that, I almost wish we could figure out a way to even out that kind of like demographic inequity so that we have the study which works best for students and then try to have everybody do that. But that's pie in the sky kind of stuff. Then, funding, like the inequity around funding. Our federal government is supposed to make up for the lack of funding that comes through lower property tax bases, right? Like our federal government is supposed to step in to plug the funding gap in poorer communities. And it does so less and less every year. And based on the results of the latest election this week, it looks like it's going to continue to trend downward. There's even talk of removing the federal education department, which would be a terrible thing. So, the inequity of, one district being able to spend $35,000 a pupil and 20 miles away because the property's not worth as much. They're able to spend $18,000 a pupil, and the federal government's supposed to kind of step in and make up the gap, but they can't. That means that your zip code determines, your potential future outcome, and that, that there's some who want to solve that by privatizing schools that would further divide the opportunities.
I don't know how in any realm of logic ever that would solve the problem.
Right. So I guess, this is going to sound sort of, basic and broad brushstroke, but I wish we funded our schools more equitably because it does come down to funding. Like there's a district, that has a robust course catalog of electives is going to create more opportunities for kids to explore what they're good at and find something that they can use to ride into whatever they're going to do after high school. And a district that can only offer the basic courses is going to, there'll be some kids who will go find those enrichment opportunities outside because their parents will have agency and access to do that. But a lot of those kids their parents will not be able to financially, or they don't understand the system well enough. The parents might be immigrants. And so there's a bit of, and my friend Colin Seal, who's the CEO of a company called ThinkLaw, partner of IEI, he talks all the time about how he was one of the lucky ones. He grew up in a working class family in Brooklyn, and he happened to have parents who got him into a gifted program, and he talks about it saving his life. And like every kid is gifted, every kid deserves to have access to those enrichment opportunities. And I think the way to fix it is look at the public schools. You can look at the private schools, right? Because they're obviously very well funded, but look at the public schools that provide more enrichment opportunities to their students. They're typically better funded, and we should be able to fund all our schools that way. But this is not something that you and I are going to solve on this podcast.
No, but I do think it's extraordinarily important to understand the big picture, because I feel a lot of it is being lost nowadays with a lot of noise, right?
Yeah.
And to me, one of the reasons for starting this podcast is to really continue to push and ask guests and get perspectives of folks to define what the education narrative should be. I think we get lost sometimes in the like what Neil Postman called like the engineering aspects of education. Like, how do we do literacy better? How do we do math better? But what has been lost for, I feel, quite some time now is this narrative around what is the goal of education, right? And I think, as you're indicating, it's to also build and support robust democracies, right? By giving people an equal playing field. Like that is at the core, the premise of America, the land of the free and the land of opportunity. It's, you know, the sort of piece that now is undeniable is, and it maybe wasn't when we were growing up, but it certainly now is, the growing disparities between the super rich and the super poor. So maybe, I know these are big problems that we're not going to solve here, but I think it's important for people to continue to talk about. But let's continue that discussion, maybe in how we address these. And I'd like to do that, Doug, through why you're doing what you're doing, because it's been clear during our discussion that these things are really important to you, and I'm certain the reason for being in IEI is there. So can you describe for the audience why you founded IEI?
Yeah. So I'm trying to I'm trying to merge my, you know, skill set and passion with an addressable need in the marketplace. So you know, if we have challenges we can't solve, the tech entrepreneurs might have solutions that we could adapt to try to solve some of those challenges. And I got tired of the Edtech ecosystem, particularly like the investors, the venture capital, sort of driving the conversation. And you know, specifically, I was sitting at an ASU GSV in the back of the room, like 12, 14 years ago, I guess, and listening to a panel of investors basically tell the room that you know, they should not work with public schools because they don't know what the hell they're doing, and they're backwards and blah blah blah, and you should go sell to families, and you should sell to private schools and, you know, consumers. And I was like, well, if you want to help like, these people started companies because they want to innovate and help solve problems for students. Like, you got to go where the students are. They're in public schools, and if you don't have the patience to deal with an RFP or with, you know, like public institutions, then you shouldn't go work in public education. Like, that sort of pissed me off. And so I sort of started saying, well, maybe I can try to step in here and make some connections. I'm a connector. I'm a relationship builder. I can work with all these superintendents I work with and all these EdTech entrepreneurs, try to get them together so they talk to each other, not past each other. And so, because there were no educators in that room that I was sitting in that day, it was investors and entrepreneurs. And like, let's get a room where we get everyone together and we really dig in, but we build it primarily around the needs of public schools. And so that's where the idea came from. And then elements of the business came together in terms of like how we make those connections and how we set up. You know, it's just as important to the IEI members that our partners get value out of the experience of being with them as it is that they get value. So this excuse me, this feeling that, like, you know, vendors are just money grubbers trying to, you know, make a quick buck, and you know, they're like, you know, somehow sort of like their needs are you know, like subjugated to my needs as an educator. That's not our environment. That like anti-vendor mentality is not where we come from, but rather like, these are people I can learn from. And I created an ecosystem where that learning can happen both synchronously and asynchronously.
So how did
it's a lot of fun.
I can imagine it's a labor of love, but Tell me, where did you begin? Like that's where the idea came from. And by the way, I
Yeah.
love that because I've been in those rooms and frustrated hearing venture capitalists talk about education like they know a damn thing about it. So from that
Right.
like moment of inspiration and determination, where did you start?
I had a consulting business going. I was coaching all kinds of companies on market positioning and sales strategy and revenue, how to grow revenue, particularly from an early stage, and building relationships. And I said, well, let me go to some superintendents, see if we want to like try this out. And I started hosting very small gatherings, like 15 soups, 10 soups for lunch, get a couple of companies, right? I mean, it sounds very basic, but it was so much more than getting a couple of companies together to buy lunch for some superintendents. Like that's just how you get the people together. But structuring the conversation, putting my consultant hat on and not letting it just be a sales pitch, but rather like stepping in and driving the conversation so that it focused around, so you elicit from the superintendents what they think their students need. And you make sure that the corporate partner understands and hears that, right? Essentially like forcing active listening was sort of the approach I took. So no matter how small the gathering, and yes, the nuts and bolts were like people paid for a lunch and people came to a lunch, right? And they ran it through me. But it started to become clear that we could advance sort of a methodology for how district leaders and corporate partners should interact and work together. And as long as we were able to stay true to the district leaders' goals and their jobs, as long as we were basically able to let them drive how they spend the time, as long as I wasn't, doing the timeshare thing. I hear that a lot from superintendents. They hate being treated like a piece of meat that has to sit in a seat in order to get a vacation, right? You want to come to Orlando, you got to sit in these meetings with these vendors. And I'm going to tell you which vendors to sit with because it meets my business interests. That was very much something that has been happening in our industry for a long time. And it sucks. And everything I've built has been to try to undo that. And lo and behold, when you do that, you increase the ROI for your partners and you gain the loyalty of the superintendent members because they're like, this is not an experience where this is not a pay to play. This is not I don't force myself to sit in these meetings. I like sitting in the meetings. Why? Because I chose to meet with the companies that are there. I'm not going to do business with all of them, but I sure am going to learn from all of them and we're going to build a relationship. And that element of what we do is why we've been successful. And it's been part of what we did since the very beginning. Then my job was just to say, okay, this is an actual business. I have to give it a name. I gave it a name and a logo. Well, this new logo here is in the last few years, it's more representative of what we actually are. But the first logo was like very old school because I wanted it to seem like we'd been around forever. And I built that and started having national gatherings. And we started doing one, and that went well, so we did another one. Then I brought some people on to help, and on we go.
Amazing. Well, I've heard from the vendor side, anyway, that they believe what you put on is kind of like magic. That it helps them identify and connect with districts that can inform the work they're doing, which I think, to your point, is what they need most. And then on the flip side, I know, and following a lot of the work you do publicly, that educators are very grateful for the structure. And from my point of view, I've done so many different conferences, with kind of breath of fresh air to see what you're doing. So I certainly want to support the work that you're doing. Anything else you'd like the audience to know about the work you're doing?
Sure. We're starting to spend more time working with district leaders. And so we're going to be growing summits for cabinet deputies, other leaders in districts, because we're losing talent right and left. So the pipeline of people, the average experience of new superintendents has decreased significantly. We're giving people jobs in big places with very little experience because we just don't have enough people to do the job. So we've got to keep working on the leadership development pipeline. We also have a significant problem in underrepresentation in educational leadership. by people of color and women. And, 50% of the kids are people of color, 50% of the kids are women. Kids need to see people who look like them in leadership positions. We know that improves outcomes. So we are committed to that. And we're finding that, superintendents are a busy lot. We don't want to have thousands of superintendents in this group. We want to be a selective, curated boutique kind of learning opportunity for superintendents who really vibe with how we do things. But the growth area is in the pipeline of up and coming leaders. And we want to spend more time with district leaders. And that also has a great benefit because it gives our members, the superintendents in our group, the opportunity to become teachers, mentors, coaches. It allows us to pay forward to the next generation and help them on their leadership journey. And that has benefits for all of us. So that's the next kind of frontier for us. And those events are, going to be starting to spread up in cities around the country. And I guess the third thing is that we've always, our DNA, it's because of kind of where I come from and the work I did before starting this. Our DNA is in the startups in EdTech. We love them. We have an event that has a high price point, so you've got to be at a certain point in your sort of fundraising or revenue to come to one of our superintendent summits. But we're always trying to find ways to come up with low price point, startup friendly ways to help those companies get their start. But we want them to get their start with us, with our tutelage and coaching from our superintendents, because our superintendents get business and they get entrepreneurialism. They just happen to be educators. And our Soup's Choice event in New York every December, we intend for that to be the kind of like way station for companies. So there are other events where you can go, ASU, GSV, and others where you can go get all kinds of coaching and advice from investors. This is the place where you go to get advice and coaching from Soups who get it, who might be your future customers after you get your company going.
I love
and
that.
We really want, we have lots of ways we can work with early stage companies and pre-funding companies. So between the startup pitch competition we do in New York in December, also our advisory services, like we want anybody who's thinking about entering the K-12 business, before you go and get a bunch of advice from investors who are going to try to make you one of the 10% of companies they make money on, come talk with us because we've got a group of people here who will be very invested in your success. Because if you're successful at solving their problems, it's good for the kids they serve, and we can all get a win together.
Well, that's awesome. And you actually anticipated my penultimate question for you, which is, what advice would you give a startup founder?
Yeah. So if you can, bootstrap as much as you can. If you can avoid private equity, if you can avoid people on your cap table who are going to take a cutthroat winner take all kind of Wall Street type approach, do it. Like the people who put money into your company are going to be important, because when you go through rough patches, which you will, you're going to have, if you have to start explaining to somebody after they've put money in and gotten on your cap table that it sometimes takes 18 months to close a 6-figure deal with a public school system, like you're going to be behind the 8 ball. Like they need to understand that up front. And if they don't have the patience for it, then they're going to ride you into the ground and maybe replace you, or, force you to make decisions that school districts are really not going to like. And, there's nothing districts like less than when a company, they get to know the founder or whatever, and that person is gone quickly. And now, there's some corporate overlord working with them. Like that's not going to go well. And I'm amazed that it continues to happen. And that these large companies will take away the people who've been working with the district. Like they're so relationship focused. And so that's the second piece of advice is, like everything in public education is about relationships. And they are, I tell people, like the people who run the school districts, educators go into it because they're people. They want to help other people learn. And the people who end up running schools and districts are like the best leaders of the people. So they're all going to make decisions based on advice they get from other people, and they're going to want to work with other people that they trust. So don't overestimate like don't overestimate the ability of your kind of like feature set to wow somebody. They're going to be much more impressed with a person who seems like their orientation is solid and they really want to help kids and they seem to know what they're doing and they're willing to roll with the punches and be a partner. That's so much more important in terms of winning this business than, having all the cool features. Like, and that's why we're here, because we want to be the facilitators of those relationships in a way that feels really good to the customers, feels really good to the district leaders. They come to our thing to shop because it's the one place they can go and not feel like they're going to be accosted or treated, or like, where everybody always wants something from them. And that's an important thing for startup founders to understand, is that this is not finance. This is not the consumer market. The way you market here is so different, and it's really about the individual and relationships.
I think that's fantastic advice. So with that and everything we've discussed today, if you look forward to, say, 50 years into the future, what would you want education to look like?
So that's interesting. We often talk about this. We talk about how if you went in a time machine to go back and look at the classrooms 50 years ago, they would look very similar to what they look like now. And people always say that as if it's a bad thing. Like, yes, maybe the desks shouldn't be in rows, right? But they're kind of not in most schools these days. But I guess I flip that. If I got in a time machine to go back 50 years or to go forward 50 years, I'd want to see an educator in a room who's building relationships with kids and caring about them and using whatever the current, methodology is for teaching literacy, right? Using whatever current technology is available. But I don't want to see kids like staring at screens. I want to see kids engaging with an adult who cares about them. And if that involves some screens, that's fine, right? Like the screen is not the thing. It's always going to be about the educator taking an interest in each of the kids who walk through the door, which is why the first thing we learned in our teaching methods class in grad school with Vito Perrone, and it's not in any book or anything, he just told us the most important thing you have to do is greet the kids at the door every day. Shake their hands, fist bump them. The most important thing is that they feel valued and seen every day, and the rest of it you can figure out. Like that's what I want to see in the classroom 50 years from now. And anybody who's all these people out there hawking all this AI stuff, like, oh, it's gonna, to me that all sounds like, 10 years ago we was going to be everyone's doing Netflix playlists for education, and we can have a school of one where there are less teachers, like, and everyone's on devices. I mean, the people coming up with that kind of stuff, A, don't get it. B, are trying to get rid of teachers and have kids taught by robots. And that's not a thing and never will be, because children deserve to be seen and enriched and engaged and loved at school. So that's what I want to see 50 years from now. Like, in terms of how we do things, I would like to see more operational efficiency in the back office. I'd like to see that. That's where I think we got to blow things up. Transportation. Why are we, beholden to these like antiquated businesses?
Hallelujah, Doug. Hallelujah. Right? Blow up the bus schedule. I'll help you with that one.
And around here, like, these bus companies are owned by like, sort of like companies that seem to have a monopoly on something, and I don't know why. Like, it's, they hold us hostage, and our taxes have to go up because they want to like charge us more. Like, it's these are the kinds of things, like how we schedule, how we access health resources for kids. That's something we're starting to see a little bit of innovation around. Telehealth services, getting Medicare funding into school districts. Like, those are things I'd love. That's where I'd like to see the huge change. But I don't want to see a classroom look too different today than it does in 50 years.
Well, I love all this, Doug, and I can certainly speak with you for another few hours.
Sure.
And maybe we do this again to dive into some of the stuff that we just scratched the surface with. But to wrap up, the question is always, what book, podcast, video, movie, album have you enjoyed recently that you'd recommend to the audience?
Yeah, that is a tough one because I really don't either. It's my ADHD or it's just that I work too much, but I have not read like a whole book since before I started IEI. Except, no, there was one vacation where I didn't work and I read a book. And it was the John Lennon, I can't remember what the hell it was called, the John Lennon biography. I just think that like his story and then the tragic end of his life is such an important story for our culture. I've read excerpts of Paul McCartney's book about the lyrics. He wrote a book called The Lyrics, and it's like they're excerpts about, and I've popped around to different songs to understand what he and John were thinking when they wrote various songs. I have nerded out on a few chapters of a book analyzing the musicological structure and tonal and harmonic structure of various Grateful Dead jams. I'm a huge music guy. My podcasts are either politics or sports, but the one that I think is kind of, everyone listens to podcasts for their teams, but the one I find most interesting these days is there's a company called John Boy Media that does they're New York based. I'm a big Yankee fan. They do a Yankee podcast, among other things.
I was going to say, as long as it's not a Yankee podcast, you can recommend it on this show, but
I'm not going to recommend the Yankee podcast. The one I'm going to recommend, is one that very few people listen to. It's called The Morning Meeting, and it's about how they're growing their business. And because he is out there, their company's out there on social media and doing podcasts, I listen to that to get strategies and tips for what we should be doing with our social media. We have a really strong social media following. And part of that is an effort to be transparent about what we're doing. So nobody can ever say that we're doing something, sort of back room, pay to play sort of scheme. Like everyone can see exactly what we're doing. All our members, board members can see exactly what we're up to. And, so that's a podcast I listen to a lot, John Boy's Morning Meeting, just to understand how he's thinking through the growth of his business, and that helps me think through mine.
With that, Doug Roberts, thank you kindly for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate being on.
So, Doug, the audience is now listening to this portion post-interview where they heard the whole background of your life and your view of public education. And it, dawned on me when I read some of the work you've been posting that we recorded so long ago, and it's taken me this while to get this out, that I wanted to make sure you had the opportunity to give folks your view of what's happening with the new changes at the Department of Education since the 2024 election. So I'll turn it over to you and get your thoughts and the work that you're doing.
Sure. My view on what's happening with the U.S. DOE and federal education policy and federal funding, it doesn't matter. What matters is that students are coming to school tomorrow morning. They're going to come to school the day after that. They're going to come to school the week following. And our job as district leaders is to serve all of those kids and to provide each of them an opportunity to feel seen, included, loved, to be educated. Every kid gets an equal opportunity. And I would bet all the tea in China that every educator who chooses to step into a classroom, certainly every district leader in our community, shares that belief and sentiment. It's core to our mission as educators. So, what's happening in DC is politics. And I just use a couple of words that trip buzzwords for some of those politics, right? I said equity and I said inclusion. And I'll go ahead and say too that I think we all believe that diversity of all kinds is very important in any sort of organization. It's important to have diversity of thought. It's important in our group. We want to have diversity of sizes of districts. We want to have diversity of backgrounds. We want to have people who've walked in all kinds of different shoes in our group. That's very important to us and will continue to be important, that we have a representative group of superintendents as members who look like all the kids in our schools. And, that doesn't change. We are not deterred in that belief and we have not stopped working toward that goal. Whatever the politicians are doing in DC really has no impact on anything we're doing here at IEI. The funding challenges are a real one for our members, and we're here to help them through it. But it's not the first time we've had federal aid challenges. We're also coming off of a moment when, post-COVID relief, there was what some of us would call a market correction, sort of refunding our public schools for several years, which was great. And I think a lot of our districts tried to be really smart about how they invested those so that there could be long-term benefit for kids. But, we're back now to sort of where we were. But what I hear a lot of politicians saying is that they want the funding levels to be back to where they were before pandemic. So, we were running our districts then. We got to be creative. We have to be nimble. A lot of our superintendents are having to think a little bit more entrepreneurially about how they run their organizations, how they can find funding to keep programs in place. We all have inflationary pressures to deal with. So, the long and short of it is we can't do anything about what the elected people and their appointed officials are doing in DC. What we can do is make sure that we provide that equitable opportunity for all kids. Some of the grant programs that fund some of the programs we run are going to disappear. And that's going to be challenging. And we're going to have to guide our communities through that with empathy and with wisdom and try to figure out the path forward. Title I has been reappropriated at the same level as last year. It doesn't seem like anyone's coming for that program, so that's good. We're worried about things like, will there be cuts to IDEA, services for students with disabilities? Will there be, cuts to some of the sort of programs that support professional development, English language learners? But I mean, who has time to borrow trouble? Like, we can't worry about what's going to happen. We just have to deal with what's going to happen. We have to make our own luck in each of our districts. We got to work with our boards on the budgeting question, because if the feds are going to step back on some of the funding, then each of us has to work with our boards to decide what our values are as a community. And, taxpayers, we have to maybe ask them to step up on our local budget if we want to keep the program in place. There's no real sense in kind of, getting upset about it. We got a job to do and we got to figure it out.
I also can't shake this feeling that despite these difficulties and obviously tumultuous times and just sorting out these issues, that there are some real spaces for opportunity. You got that sense? You have any indication as to what the opportunities might be, and despite all of this?
Yes. So I want to say, before I talk about AI as an opportunity, I want to say beforehand that anybody coming to districts and saying AI is going to solve all your problems, that's not a good approach. It immediately gets panned as being ridiculous. Nobody wants silver bullets. We never want that in public schools. What we want is our tools to help teachers help kids. So all that being said, all the new kind of operational efficiency that AI is creating in organizations has great promise to scale things that really don't touch the teacher-student relationship, but more like how we run the business of a school district, how we plan transportation, how we set up menus for school meals, how we schedule, how we communicate and connect with our community of educators. Districts are school districts are very flat organizations without a lot of middle management. There's a principal who's responsible for 80, 100, however many staff members of all different stripes. And so AI.
I actually never thought about it that way. I think that's a really interesting perspective. It is, when you put it that way, it is quite flat.
Right. There's no kind of junior manager who reports to a middle manager, reports to a senior manager, who reports to a director, et cetera. So, and even like the people who are directors at the district, they're usually responsible for areas of function. Like I'm the director of instruction, but the teachers all report to the principal.
Correct.
Point is, like, when you don't have those kind of weekly one-to-one meetings like we have in more hierarchical organizations, AI can help people connect and help, that the ability for teachers to feel kind of more seen and respected and heard through AI tools is an area of great promise. I also think this situation, and some would characterize some of what's happening now as an attempt to privatize public education. Some would characterize it as an attack on public ed. Some would characterize it as, at the very least, a lessening of support from the federal government to public schools. Whatever it is to you, that's up to you to decide. But it creates an opportunity to make sure that we put out to the world from our districts our brand and our success, and tell our story. Because if we, tell our story as a local school system, then the people in our community are going to support what we're trying to do. If they support what we're trying to do, we'll all get to stay in our jobs longer. So we see that as a great opportunity. That's why our summer session coming up is all about building the district's brand. That's what we're doing PD for our district leaders all around. Like, here's how to tell your story and make sure everyone knows that you've accomplished great things this school year. And if everyone supports what you're doing, then if you need to ask them for more money because one funding source is disappearing, maybe they're willing to support you. And let's make our own luck and let's tell our own stories.
Well, that's amazing. And mine and your mission there are very aligned. And that's what I hope to continue doing here through the podcast. Right. Last question. If you were, and maybe you verged on it just now, to give district leaders, because you work with a widest, maybe out of anybody I know, the widest variety of leaders in districts across certainly the United States, one piece of pointed advice or encouragement for these times, what would it be?
The advice is don't be afraid to tell your story. Don't think that it's tough, because so many people go into public education, particularly leadership. They are servants. They are called to serve. And what comes with that is a great degree of humility. Yeah. And you can still be humble while also telling the story of the good work you're doing. And don't feel like it's calling too much attention or you're bragging. It's essential in this world of social media that the community understands all the good work you're doing. So don't be afraid to toot the district's horn. And if you're a humble person with your kind of ego in check, you're going to do it in the right way. But we have a whole community of people who are pretty good at this, who can help give you feedback on it. But I think that's, this is a time to go over the top, celebrating the wins in public education. And that's my main advice to folks right now. And I think secondarily, start putting your financial thinking caps on, and start to get creative, work with your regional agency. Don't wait for bad news. Go and make your own good news and try to figure out how you can streamline, how you can create operational efficiencies. Any place you can find efficiency that doesn't impact student program. There are ways to get volunteers to come into your school and help out with things like tutoring. And there are tech solutions that help operationalize that. Like, go be creative. The last thing I'll say is there is a ton of new innovation coming because of the onset of AI, and there are a lot of tools getting built. A lot of them are very early stage. So this is a good time to think through. If you can work with your board, or if you're a deputy, work with your superintendent, create some sort of little innovation fund, if possible, usually like within a PD budget, where it doesn't have to be a lot of money. Vendors who are looking for pilots will take a pilot for like $5,000, $2,500. They just want something from the district. You could potentially get a renewed solution tried out with your teachers that could revolutionize how you teach or how you do some aspect of your business. If you can get the district to allocate just $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 for an R&D budget to try out new solutions, it could create a great opportunity for students in the future.
With that, Doug Roberts, thank you for your time.
Jason, thanks for having me back.
This podcast is recorded on the territory and Treaty 13 lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. The show is edited and produced by the marvelous and talented Andrew Mastroianni. If you like what you're hearing, make sure you subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next time, remember, there's absolutely no inevitability as long as there's a willingness to contemplate what's happening. I'm your host, Jason Buccheri. Until next time.